Welcome to our evening to celebrate the mission of Lutheran Social Service of Michigan. It's a great evening, and you are lovely to look at. You really are. What a great group of people. Generosity and love and history and decades of doing so, and thousands upon thousands of people in which we've been privileged as a result of your support to share in life. And that's what we're doing this evening, is to celebrate mission. Our mission is expressing the love of Christ in what we do. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But let's talk a little about the church, and the sense of the church and social ministry is what we call what we do. And that is, I do have control of this, don't I? Beginnings 80 years ago, in 1934. And it was known as the Luther Intermission League at that time. And it was in the first decade of the 1900s that we formally got together as Lutheran to do social ministry. And that time, I'm assuming and know from history that it was focused on immigrants. And the church was narrow, a little bit narrow at the time, in the sense that it was all about German immigrants primarily, and most of the congregation were German speaking. And that's kind of a dark part of my Norwegian history, is to admit that we're all from Germanic tribes. Even the Norwegians, of course, don't want to admit such things, but we must at times when we look at it in reality. But then in 1919, there was a movement, and in that time, a movement of city missionaries, where pastors would come to a community and wouldn't have necessarily a congregation in which they're in Word and Sacrament each week and in worship, but they would come and serve community. And one of those was Reverend Martin Luther Frederick. What a great name, isn't it? He came from Ohio. And so whenever I hear in Michigan nothing good comes from Ohio, this is one good thing, really good thing, that came from Ohio. And Reverend Martin Luther Frederick. And, the story goes that he had 8 children at the time and 1 on the way. And they were in a kind of like a Studebaker type of thing with a hatch and a baggage carrier on the back and on the roof, and they had packed all that they owned on the top of the car and on the back of the car. And as I understand it, at the old Salem Lutheran site around there, they broke down right in the middle of the intersection. And they had to be towed over to the church and parked there. And that was their entree into Detroit. We interviewed one of his daughters, I believe in 2003, a surviving daughter, and she told us that she can't remember an evening growing up in which their household didn't have dinner prepared, and there were 15 to 20 people and guests, feeding guests from the neighborhood and around the community. Their clothing was minimal. Their closets weren't filled with their stuff. Their basement wasn't filled with all of the collectibles and things that we pick up and store for whatever reason. Sometimes I have to wonder myself why I keep things. It was stored with goods and food and clothing for other people within the community, to invite the hungry, to welcome the stranger, and to love the neighbor. And this is the beginnings of Lutheran social ministry in Michigan, and founded in the church. We only really officially became Lutheran Social Service of Michigan in 1959, going from the Intermission League to Lutheran Charities, and now to our modern name. And I was speaking a little bit tonight at a reception that one of the prominent leaders in the history of this organization came in around 1973, Carl Thomas. At that time, the organization was about $5 million in revenue, somewhere in there. And it was really struggling. In fact, it was paycheck to paycheck, and we were running out of funds. And Carl had to find collateral, and he found some burial plots that the organization had and sold them, so they would cash for collateral and then convince the banks to extend a line of credit to the organization. And from there to now, from Carl's day, I really consider him a founder of sorts, in the sense of the situation that he came into. Gone from about $5 million, I think we're approaching about $108 or $109 million of service this year. And so what a foundation has been built in the love of the church, built on the Word in the sense of loving neighbor. And loving God and loving neighbor. And it's a great, great tradition. And it's a wonderful thing to be a part of. Our mission is serving as an expression of the love of Christ. And when I think about service, really I like to use the term sharing in life. It really isn't any type of simple transaction, and definitely we're not trying to do something to someone else. But we're really sharing in life with another. I've experienced our staff again and again in their work. And one of the things that I really admire about our staff is they have the ability to be present with someone for a period of time until they're invited into their life. What a privilege it is to be invited into another's life. And I believe that that is sharing in life, not just serving. And to express the love of Christ is to be Christ in a broken world. And for us as work, this would be, I believe, be vocation. And I've always understood from Luther vocation to be something to be like the intersection of faith and service. When that happens, that's true vocation. Recently, we had a survey of our staff. 55% responded to the survey. We had a number of questions. Would you give me just a napkin, please? We had a number of questions that we asked them, but one of them was, do you believe that you're doing God's work in the sense of what you do from day to day? And 91% of our staff, 91% responded that they believed that they were doing God's work and meeting the needs of the people they served, that they shared in life with. It warmed my heart. I hope it does for you too. It's a great organization with great beginnings and foundation, and continues to be strong in Christ in its work. We operate 70 programs in 44 cities with more than 1,800 staff. And we have really broken down what we do into 3 areas. Services to children and families, which would include the topic of this evening, and refugee services and unaccompanied minors. Services for senior adults, senior living. And the third area, major area of service, is service to persons with disabilities. That's how we see ourselves in 3 major areas. And when we began to think about this in the sense of service for our future, we've been thinking a lot about what it means to view the person as God views us. And our staff got together in a group that we called the Spillywig. Don't ask me what the acronym actually stands for. But it was the Spillywig, and no prodding was necessarily as they began to explore the mission of the organization and say, what is it that we could do to bring greater impact in the sense of those we share in life? And the group quickly came to the point that God sees the whole person, not just one aspect, but the whole person. And the question was for us as an organization, why aren't we viewing the whole person? We get many times to be very regulative, in the sense of important things that have to be cared for, but not necessarily widening our view to really appreciate and see the wholeness of the person. So we began to think about what we've termed to be dignity promotion. Dignity promotion. And that means that we see the whole person, that in that view that we'll bring an array, a continuum of care, not just a slice here and there of things that are important, but a continuum of care that matches their life. And we'll match that care to the person through what we're terming to be care management. We're beginning to work on this as a future from a strategic perspective. And our future is really about the whole person and to be within their natural setting. That is where they believe they belong and where they have a magnetic pull, where they have a sense of belonging and they're a member of a community. And moreover, we want to be increasingly as an organization, as a social ministry, to be generative. We define this in the sense of generative means that we are striving to help others so that they can contribute. That anybody who's really living is giving. And how do we get to that point to where an individual, even though they begin in crisis, can get to the point to where they can give to others and contribute to family, to community, to church? And there's a great example of this recently with a man that lives here in town at Allison House. And it's an independent living for persons with disabilities. And this person has had a dream to be a truck driver. So he took his big screen TV and a number of other components, put them together, and put together a truck simulator in his apartment so he could practice to the extent that where he could become this truck driver. And he's been successful at it. He's striving for that, getting more skilled all the time. But the thing that really occurred to him is that he wanted to advocate for other persons with disabilities, that they might also drive truck. And that to us is being generative, going beyond just our own needs, but thinking about our neighbor, loving the neighbor. Tonight's topic is about refugees. And many of you may ask a question, what's a refugee? I will say that it is not necessarily an immigrant, given all of the news surrounding that from day to day, but a refugee is a specific designated person designated by the UN and designated in America by the Department of State as being someone who had to flee their country of origin. And they had to flee because it was unstable to the point to where they were persecuted and there would be physical harm, that there would be a well-founded fear, and that they could no longer return. And the persecution could be about race or religion or nationality or social group or even political opinion. We all can think of the circumstances going on in the world today, and I'm sure we can think of the many circumstances which have caused others to flee. We've had a long history of refugee service. And in 1949, of course, we began in receiving those who were resettled, needed to be resettled, who were displaced by the war. And 3,500 people came at that time, displaced by the war. War, of course, as we all know, has devastating consequences and effects on the human being, on the person. And this has always been the case for us as an organization. Post-war brings more refugees to us in America. And in 1975, we saw refugees from the Vietnam War. And we were named a regional coordinator. Began working more formally with Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, a national Lutheran organization that coordinates with federal government to do this type of work. And of course, post-Vietnam War, and we saw the Amerasian and then Hmong population come to Michigan in the 1980s, from Cuba, from Haiti, the Southern Sudanese in the early 2000s. Just prior to that, the Bosnian and Russian groups that came. And then most recently, the Burmese from 2005 until this time, and also a large population over the last 5 to 6 years, Iraqi. Both Iraqi Chaldean and Iraqi Muslim. Families that have come from places where they can no longer live safely. And then since 2002, Lutheran Social Service of Michigan has provided long-term care for migrant youth. A little different from a refugee. They're refugees in a sense, and they're asylees because of the circumstances they flee, but they don't necessarily have the official designation, but here they are. Here they are. And we're going to learn a little bit about that. It's been great to have these young men and women to be part of us in our communities and in our culture as gifts. And we're going to learn a lot about that this evening. Our LSSM program managers will speak about this after the dinner.